Hello, Gina. Nice to see you. And beautiful weather we're having. We mustn't complain. It's really, it's lovely and warm.
It certainly is that, but it's a great pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you today.
Oh no, it's my pleasure. Such an important lady, award-winning for all sorts of things. So I'm quite honoured. So we're here to talk about leadership and being successful leaders. I just want to ask a question to start with. Do you think we're born leaders, or do you think we can learn to be leaders?
I think, like almost anything, there are those who are born with an innate advantage in that they find leadership a natural way of being. But I think anybody can learn to be a good leader. It's about leading yourself first and doing the inner work before you start to work with other people, and recognizing the different elements of being an effective, caring leader. And so, yes, I think that if people are prepared to put in the work, that's the caveat, then they can learn to be good leaders. But inevitably, just like athletes, if you're born with natural talent, then it's easier.
I obviously, you've been a head teacher and I've run 4 nurseries. So we're both leaders.
Absolutely.
I was always a bossy boots as a child. I'm thinking that might be a trait to being a leader. I'm not sure.
I think inevitably, if you are a bossy boots, and I also had that levelled at me, it doesn't always make you the best leader. I think you've got to temper bossy.
Yeah, you learn to do it differently.
And ultimately, the best idea that people have is the one that they think they've had themselves. And so empowering other people to come up with the solutions, I think, is a much more empowering way, a much more successful way of developing people, because those bosses who are just bossy, and you have then a culture of, well, I've told you to jump, well, tell me how high.
Yeah, it's authoritarian.
People don't think for themselves. But ultimately, if you can work with people so that they, within the values and the culture and the vision that you've set, that they can then think for themselves, then you've got a much more successful organization. And you as a leader have time to be working strategically on your business rather than having to direct everybody.
Yeah, and I must say I've been guilty of that until I had a business coach. And then I learned not to go in and rescue everybody. And the monkey book. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
I'm not sure that I do.
Right, I'll have to put it underneath the video. Can't remember who it is. The manager meets the monkey. I think that's what it's called. And the idea is that you don't take on other people's problems. You get them to sort it out for themselves.
That, I mean, if you look at Stephen Covey, for example, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and the 8th Habit. And the 8th Habit was written some 15 years later, after the first book. And he then, it's old hat in a sense now, but he talks about being a servant leader. And that the best leaders are those who engage their staff in such a way that they are given the space and the support to succeed, but failure is seen as an opportunity to learn and develop and grow. And I think one of the challenges that we have in life at the moment is that the pace of things is so fast that there is that danger that people want to direct because they think that's going to get them success quickly. But in the end, they might get success in the short term, but in the long term, it's very costly because they have to be the fount of all preferment, the fount of all standards, rather than every member of staff, whatever their role, seeing themselves as the leader, but seeing themselves as the leading professional within, whether that's a cleaner, the secretary, a teacher, whoever, that they then know intrinsically the standards. You know, what does excellence look like, feel like in the context of this organization?
Now, look, I mean, we're we're looking at, well, our audience are early years staff in the main, working in day nurseries or preschools. They might be childminders as well.
Yeah.
And right now we have a huge recruitment crisis. We've had one for years, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And now we're going to have extra places made in schools by the government. Not sure how they're going to be staffed. But a lot of our workforce are very young.
Yes.
Gen Z or Gen Z, however you like to say it. And I've learnt just over the last couple of weeks that we need to treat them slightly differently. They have different expectations in the workplace. But we've got that aside, they're very young. You know, you could have somebody very young who's running an age group, for example, what we would call a team leader of a room. So might have 24 3s to 5s or 9 babies in a room, or more babies even. And it must be very hard. I mean, I know there's a difference between managing and leading.
Yes.
But most managers have to do both in early years. The owner may not be, the directors may not be there on site. So, you know, they are leading the team as well as managing the nursery or preschool. I'm just thinking of the age that, you know, people are perhaps being pushed into needing to lead.
I think
much younger.
I think that creates a particular challenge for those who are appointing them. And I think for me, there are a number of stages to this. One is about let's talk about the staff shortage for a moment, and then we'll talk about making the most of the resources that you have at your disposal. And I'm going to use an example that's very different to early years, but you'll get the principles of it. Now, education, and my background is not early years, but it's in general education, but the principles that I'm sharing with you are true, actually, whatever you're talking about. That when you're in a time of shortage, there is a tendency to think, I've got to have a body, and I'll have that body on any terms. And I know from going through teacher shortages, particularly in my early years as a head teacher, I learned the very hard way that don't appoint somebody because they are breathing and they're walking.
Been there, done that. Yeah, I get that.
Make sure that you're appointing people who you know, even if they are not at the level that you want them to be yet, if they have the potential and they are willing to learn and they are hardworking and good team members, those are the things I look for. I can teach them, was my view. I can teach them the how-tos. I can't teach people to have those values and those ethics.
Yeah, attitude. The attitude is wrong.
Absolutely.
It's hopeless.
And so the example I'm going to use with you is actually with lorry drivers. During the pandemic, there was a national shortage of lorry drivers. And I was working with someone who said, I can't get lorry drivers for love nor money. And I said, let's have a look at your advert. And of course, your advert is the window on your organization, your culture, the way in which you operate. And it said, you know, a 40-hour week, this amount of money, truck driver must have these qualifications. And I said to the guy, what is it that you do? And he said, well, we transport any product from place to place. And I said, why is that important? And he said, well, without it, the shops wouldn't have goods and people wouldn't have food. And so the conversation, I questioned to the point that he said, well, we're the lifeblood of the country. Without us working in the way that we do, the country would come to a standstill. And so I said, and what about your people? Do you value them? Yes. Do you train them? Yes. Do they know how valued they are? Yes. That's not in your advert. And so
they know why they're important.
That talked about we are an organisation that values our people. We together are the lifeblood of the country. If you want to come to an organisation that will look after you, that values your contribution, and that will support and train you to move on in your career, then this is the job for you. He never had another shortage of lorry drivers. No. Because his why, his culture, the way in which he was going to engage with people came through the advert. And so people, when they're looking, and when it's a market where there's lots of opportunities, what are you going to go to? The one that says, you know, I'll give you so many hours at so much money, or the one that says, I really want you to come and join our team where you're going to be valued. And I think people forget that these days that their advert needs to stand out. Now, there's one huge caveat. It's easy to write an advert, but if you don't fulfill what you've promised, then you're shooting yourself in the foot, because they won't stay. And because ultimately, if you don't have integrity, then everything falls over. Yeah. So in terms of shortage, if you are really clear about your why, your passion, your culture within that, then the chances are you will attract better people more easily than you would if you didn't do that. Then, particularly with young people, but it's true of every age group, the way you induct people, the way you support and train and engage people, particularly in those early months, is absolutely crucial. But that's why getting people who are wanting to learn, hardworking, good team members who have the value of wanting to make a difference to children, if you've got those staff, then the induction and the ongoing training becomes so much more possible than if you've got people who are just in it because they've got a job and they didn't know what else to do. Yeah.
Unfortunately, people are moving out of childcare because it's so pressurised.
Yeah, I understand.
It's so poorly paid and not respected, etc., etc. But in my nurseries, we didn't have job descriptions.
No.
We had our ethos, and it was all broken down into just exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, having the right attitude, wanting to put the children first, wanting to do further training, etc., etc. So it is really important. But I'm feeling very sorry for nursery managers and owners and directors, because they, even if they go out to do what you're suggesting, which is right, I totally agree, they still may not recruit because they're just not the people out there. And if they don't have enough staff, then they can't have children, and it impacts the viability of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not in any way making light of the challenge. No. Inevitably, the solution, some of the solution is outside the early years settings hands. All I'm saying is that within the context of what is within your control, giving yourself the best chance is really important. The other thing I would say, particularly in the light of what you describe in terms of your early years, I think for me, the things that's always made the biggest difference is having collective conversation and a collective agreement within each organisation. And whether we're talking about early years or general education or in business, having an understanding of, if we're talking about excellence in the context of, let's say, play for 3 to 5 year olds, or preparation for school, or health and well-being, coming together to the gold standard of what does that look like? What behaviours do we need to see? What are the things that we need to be mindful of if we want excellence? What's the difference between okay and good, good and excellent? Because one of the challenges as a manager or a leader is we use words and we assume that everybody else has got the same blueprint for those words, but we haven't. Each of us has our own an internal standard of what those are, and creating a collective standard raises the bar quickly, and you can sustain that improvement over time, so long as it becomes part of everyday conversation.
We actually, obviously we had our policies, procedures, but we also had codes of practice.
Yeah.
And often a code of practice would be a photograph
to
show what the breakfast table should look like.
Yes.
Especially for because we also were a training organisation in its own right with cash, and especially for the very young staff who perhaps had never laid up breakfast. No, and didn't know that a tablecloth really needed to be ironed or not have creases in. In fact, we never ironed a thing if it came out the tumble dryer quickly and folded up neatly straight away. But you know that was the situation that started the photographs off. Was we had tables laid with creased. We had tables laid for breakfast with creased tablecloths on, and they thought that was fine.
Well, if I said to you that when I left my headship after over 20 years of being a head teacher, and that was in 2004, just before I left, I did a survey of the children in my school, and there were 500 children in my school. 44% of them had no dining room table. So I'm not surprised then that not only do they not know how to lay up a table, but they don't know what a tablecloth is for, because they didn't have a dining room table at home.
That's right. That's right. And I learnt, I went to a conference and heard a couple of people speak about Gen Z, which hadn't even occurred to me, although I'm very much somebody that tries to meet everybody's needs, whatever age group, however tall they are. And I was amazed. No, it made sense, totally made sense, but I had never thought about it, how young people only communicate via phones and tablets and computers, mainly.
Yeah.
So they don't pick up body language, they don't pick up facial expressions, perhaps like the older generations do. Well, so you might have something that you're feeling quite upset about, but they won't pick up that you're upset about it. So you have to be really quite clear in your instructions on what you're expecting, etc. I found it fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
I also think that part of any induction for young staff should be around communication and recognizing that around 56% of communication is body language, and giving them the opportunity to actually play with that within a training session. It doesn't take long. And that, 30% or more is tonality. Think of the word thank you. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Same word, but the tonality gives a completely different message. And the recognition that 95% of our thinking is habitual. It doesn't cross our conscious mind. And so we are very affected by tone, particularly. Have you ever had a situation where suddenly there's a row and people think, what was that all about? The likelihood is that somebody said something in that tone which was critical teacher or critical parent. The other person has bitten back, and then that's triggered the initial person. And before you know where you are, they're having a row, but nobody quite knows what the row's about. And so teaching people, it can be done within an hour and a half. Giving people that understanding and those tools can make a significant difference.
And that could be on a continuous part of a continuous improvement plan, couldn't it?
Absolutely.
As a task to be done.
I mean, there's lots
from a leadership point of view.
Yeah, there's lots of products out there. I've got a video training program. It's very inexpensive. People can watch it in their own time, but it shares communication in a way that gives people an insight that perhaps they wouldn't have had if they didn't think about it. If you're not conscious of something, you can't do anything about it.
No.
But ultimately,
that's just reminded me about NLP.
Yeah.
And putting yourself in the other person's shoes, I think, is really very important to really understand.
Nobody knows what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes unless you really are demonstrating empathy. And I think, when we're talking about leadership, having empathy is incredibly important. And that leads me back to that. Everything leads back to you have to do the deep dive work on yourself. Manage your own emotions, recognize your own thoughts and whether they limit you or empower you, looking at the way in which you operate. And I talk very much about taking radical responsibility for your thoughts, your beliefs, your actions, and your words. And if you are a manager or a leader of an organization, recognizing what are the values of that organization and imagining a horizontal line. What are the behaviors that are above the line? They're in line with those values. What are the behaviors that drop below the line? And getting your staff to recognize this, getting very close to the line. There's the line. We don't dip below it. And it makes it much easier then to have those challenging conversations to say, actually, that's not how we operate here. Remember the conversation that we had about values. Remember the conversation we had about how important it is that we model those values for one another, and as important, if not more so, for the children in our care.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, we're talking about things outside our control.
Yes.
I think there are quite a lot of leaders in early years who try very hard to voice opinions, for example, how important play is, and school readiness is not. School should be ready for the children rather than the children be ready for the school, sort of thing. But play, there's a big thing at the moment in early years around how important play is and how children learn through play, not by just leaving them to get on with it, but having a structured play environment with the outcomes that they're hoping the children are going to gain from the opportunities that they're giving them.
Absolutely.
And also around men working in early years, equal opportunities and the challenges that they have. And that actually is our next Spark debate. We're talking to somebody. My internet is not very good. I'm just saying, if it goes funny.
Okay.
I think that what I'm trying to say is leadership goes beyond your setting and your business. I think it often goes beyond to it. It's about also educating the world around what is important, which is all again about values and ethos, isn't it?
It is. I think, again, this comes back to, this is about leading yourself. So it's about leadership for life. We are the common denominator that goes into every moment of every day. And it's very difficult to say, this is my professional me, this is my personal me. So at that level, I think it's important to recognize that these are the principles for living a successful life. When you're then talking about all of the stakeholders, working with, I couldn't agree with you more that structured and considered play is vital. I think it's ridiculous that in schools children are expected to be tied to a desk and to be working on academic stuff as early as they are. I don't agree with it at all. I don't think we've got
very pleased to hear that.
I don't think we've got an education system. I think we've got an examination system, which in my opinion is something quite different. Yeah. And so part of this, I think, is working with your partner schools, working with your parents, because there are some parents, if my parents were anything to go by, who did not value anything that wasn't in an exercise book. And I think that, my young people were older, but I think we have to demonstrate that play enables children to develop the skills that they're going to need in society. So the capacity to be creative, to solve problems, to communicate effectively, to engage with other people, to demonstrate empathy. And I think part of the challenge, and it is a challenge, but I don't think it's insurmountable, is sharing that with everybody and doing that consistently. And then I also think that the power of one voice is limited, but when you collectively gather that voice and consistently engage in pressure, I'm not saying you'll get an instant answer, but I think it's the only way moving forward that will elicit change. And I'll give you an example. I'm a vice chair of Fatima's UK campaign, which is an organisation which is looking to change the care system and the way in which care leavers are dealt with within the UK. In many ways, the parallel between early years and the care system is very close. And the situation is people work in silos, they don't share, they don't talk to one another. We've just pulled off a huge summit, 2-day summit in the Guildhall in April, where we brought people together from every different aspect, from early intervention, foster care, kinship care, all of the different cares, health, education, police, probation, business, housing, the whole 9 yards. And for the first time ever, we had under one roof working together, and we've already started to see some differences and government to start taking notice. And this is not a criticism, please don't take it at that, but we can do one or two things. It's too difficult. The external things make life very, very difficult. What can you do? Or we can collectively say, if we bring pressure to bear in a constructive and cohesive way, we can then start to change things. One of the things that happens with national government and local government, in my opinion, is just my opinion, is that it fragments us. And so you have lone voices. And actually, we've got to come together in a way that's not moaning, but is just, you've got to provide the evidence. So back to what I was saying around play, communication, creativity, we've got to demonstrate the benefits of that.
Yeah, and that is also happening in early years. We've got some really powerful groups.
Yeah.
But they're not working. They're not seen to be working together. I'm not saying they're not working together at all. Some of them maybe, but they're not seen to work together, and therefore they lose their power, which is unfortunate.
If every early years organisation was singing from the same voice at the same time, the noise would be deafening.
As one. Yeah. And also we have in early years, I feel, a duty, which is in the EYFS, but in my view, it's not strong enough. I personally feel that parents should be on board with their children's learning from the day they walk in the nursery, or even before, when they come to look around the nursery. And our software enables parents to do that in a stage appropriate way, rather than getting them to write before they're ready, for example. Yes. But also we need to help parents understand that they have this big role to play, and their child's brain is going to be 90% grown before they go to school. So they really do need to come on board and take part. But they're also our customers, our paying customers. And I know what it's like. And I'm sure the same thing happened in schools. You know, the parents you really want to come to parents' evening don't turn up, you know. But going back to the bigger picture, and that's what leadership, I think, is a lot about. It is about the big picture, the big picture of your organisation, or the big picture of your community that you're within, or if you feel strong enough, the big picture for the country, etc. What was I going to say? I've gone off track a little bit. I mean, you have to stick your neck out, and And you have to that's right, you have to educate the parents, because actually for every child that enters a nursery or preschool, there is 1 or 2 parents, and that's more votes than you've got. If that makes sense.
That's very true. I think,
and they really have to understand it, you know, because it's not socially, and the same thing probably with schools. I'm sure parents, you know, education is for the schools to do, managing behaviours for the schools to do, you know, I can see that. But we have to educate parents very early on. I think the earlier the better, because if you get them when they first start in your setting or during that show round, then you can influence them and you know, get them on board early.
I'd like to take it one stage further. I used to do parenting courses. If you look at, for example, attachment disorder, and 20 years ago it was thought that 30% of children had some level of attachment disorder, and I don't need to tell you that has such a profound effect on children's ability to organize themselves, to communicate, to manage time, to see cause and consequence, and so on. We know from research that that's done in the first 9 months of life. I'd like it when parents are all very keen and they're pregnant and they're going to antenatal classes. I'd like to get to them then, because we live in a time when too many parents, I believe, when a child is being, as they see it, challenging, instead of recognizing what that child wants is your attention, that they are giving them a phone or a tablet. Now, I'm not intrinsically against phone or tablet, but many parents have a relationship with their child where the child spends more time facing a screen than they do them. I'd like to see push chairs where they turn them back so they're facing the parents again, so that the parents can say, oh, look, there's a dog, or look at the blue door, or what number's that? And even though the child might not understand it at the time, you are already engaging that child in terms of that meaning. I'd like parents to start reading to their children when they are absolutely tiny, and have that lovely coogie moment when you've got a little baby with a cloth book or a cardboard book, so that children start to recognize those things. And if you get parents when they're really keen, which is before the sleepless nights and the temper tantrums at the age of 2 and 3, you are more likely, I think, to solve that. It's no wonder, is it, that 1/3 of children coming into school at the moment, and that's not nursery school, that's school, are not yet toilet trained. Many of them don't know their name because they're so used to being called by their pet name that they have no idea that their name is Joseph. They're just known as Jay.
We could take it a step further even, couldn't we? We could have parenting lessons in school. You know, there used to be child development. You used to be able to get a GCSE in child development, not when I was at school, but afterwards. And that got phased out. Cooking lessons got phased out, became technology sort of lessons, didn't they?
I think many of the enrichment things within school, music, sport, in some schools, geography and history, you know, looking at the child in the whole seems to have disappeared. And I think that's a huge detriment to children as individuals and to society as a whole. And I do think that whilst I'm not loading the gun, I'm pointing it at early years. I think because you are the first tranche of formal, I don't mean formal education, but formal
education,
being engaged with other professionals, there is a lot of work around that induction, as you say, before they actually, the child starts, where you can engage them. And so long as it's not preachy, you know, it's looking at, you know, we're after the best interests of your child. Let's work in partnership. I think you're more likely to get the results that you want.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's just talk about, if you don't mind, let's talk about managing as opposed to leadership.
Okay.
Because actually all the things we've spoken about before now, setting the ethos and what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, employing the right people who are willing to learn and grow, etc., are all, although they have to be managed on a day-to-day basis, they're all would be set by a leader leading the team, leading the expectations. But in my mind, the manager, I didn't have a nursery manager, by the way. I was the nursery manager and business owner across all my nurseries. I'm not sure quite how I managed to do that, but I did. And we worked as one organisation across all the nurseries, if that makes sense. But we had what I call team leaders who used to run their room, and they really did. They used to look at the staff's well-being, their training needs. They used to do the appraisals, leaving me to get on with other things, which is where the software came in, really. But, you know, let me look at the strategic side of where my business was going, where what projects I wanted to bring in to the setting. I mean, a lot of people have heard about Makaton in settings, but we probably did it well before anybody else. You know, I think that there is a significant difference, isn't there, here between leadership and management? That's what I'm trying to say.
I think leadership, as you say, is about the strategic development, creating and developing the vision with staff, but ultimately you're the captain, you're the one steering the ship.
Yeah.
Managers for me are, how does that translate from the strategic into the day-to-day? And you know, that can involve all sorts of different levels, but ultimately clarity around what is expected, and also monitoring and evaluating the outcome of what's going on. As you say, providing the training and support to make sure that happens, looking after the welfare. The managers are really the people on the ground, and that could be, you know, the manager of a big operation, but at the same time managing your section within the room. If you happen to be 5 of you in a room, then you are being, it goes back to this principle of being the leading professional within it, whichever setting that you're talking about, and managing. How do you translate that strategic plan into its components moment by moment?
And actually, that's made me think about something else. I mean, I was very lucky. I had a team, a core team that had been with me years.
Yeah.
And they outgrew their roles. But the reason why I didn't have a manager and I didn't have a deputy for the majority of the time either was because I wanted the skills to stay with the children. But I didn't want them in an office.
No.
I had an office manager that did all the fees and that sort of thing, and the waiting list. Well, I used to help with the waiting list as well, but she used to do all the nitty gritty. But I was very conscious that I was going to lose them if I didn't enable them to become leaders in their own right, if that's what they wanted to do, by becoming, I suppose you'd call it, a subject leader in a school, you know, responsible for special educational needs, or language and literacy, or trying to think of them all, equality and diversity, you know, and they would lead the outcomes that we discussed, to the whole of the team. And I had over 50 staff, as I said earlier, so that everybody was on board. And again, about making those expectations in place. And I think, you know, that's quite important. But that's really, you know, we were not short-staffed in the main. Many nurseries and preschools now are short-staffed because they can't recruit. And I am sure many managers spend a lot of time with the children rather than doing their manager's role, just because they don't have a person to be in that room at that time.
I just want to make a differentiation, because I think we use the word manager, and many people think that a manager has to be on the outside with an office. That's not the case, in my opinion. A manager is somebody who, in whatever role they are in, so for example, you use the example of school, all of them had a full-time classroom commitment. They fulfilled their managerial role for their subject as an addition, but they also managed the education within the classroom. So they were managers. And so I think managers there's as many different iterations of a manager as there are organizations. So long as it's well defined within the organization and everybody understands what is expected of them as a manager, then there is no right or wrong. But ultimately, I think you're right. I'll give you an example. I set up a probationary program for probationary teachers long before it became statutory. And I became very aware that they'd finished their probationary year and then there was nothing. And it would take probably 5 years for teachers to reach their real potential as teachers, classroom teachers. And so I set up a program, and all of my programs, apart from the probationary year, were voluntary. And so people would then go into a 2-year program that I ran to get people up to that 5-year level of ability and expertise, but do it quickly. I set the agenda for that. We met monthly, and those staff were, if you came out of your probationary year, the expectation when you were appointed is that you would then go into that program. They call themselves the next step. I didn't. Now, in education, I don't know if it's the same in early years, the end of May is a nightmare because people have to get their resignation in by the 31st of May because most jobs start in the September term. It can happen in the other terms, but the majority of teachers wait till the end of the school year because they've got an allegiance to their class.
Yeah, that doesn't happen in early years.
Right. Well, in the same year, in the same week, I had 5 really good teachers come and say, we're now in our 4th year. We think we're ready for promotion. And I knew, because our school by this time had a brilliant reputation for developing teachers, that I was likely to lose them because they were good people. And I said to them, go and have a look at the school. Go and find out what development they will offer you. In those days, the incremental point was worth £500. And that was a lot of money in those days if you were a young teacher. And I said, what I will promise to do is I will give you training so that you can actually skip that promotion and go to the next one if you'll stay. They all stayed. They set up a group where we together identified the content of the course, and I promised them that if I wasn't able to deliver it, I'd find somebody who was an expert in it. Everybody stayed. Every one of those, 3 of the 5 became head teachers, 2 of them became deputies very quickly. Now, that was all done, and I need to say it was done against a backdrop of union action when we were told we could only have 1 meeting a week. And I'd said to these staff, look, it's voluntary. There's no, this is the second group. Nobody's going to moan if you don't come. But ultimately, see if that £500 equates to the training and opportunities you'll get here. And I think we've got, if you, as early years leaders, start to be creative about how do you develop and keep your staff, keep them interested, keep them growing and learning and evolving in a way that supports their long-term career, but at the same time protects you, so that not only do you have the reputation that people, in the end, I didn't ever have a problem when there was a shortage of staff. People wanted to come to my school because they knew that if you came to the school, you were going to get a really good training and development opportunity. It doesn't happen instantly, but it can make a big difference in terms of the recruitment and the retention of staff if you do.
Yeah, I agree totally. And I'm sure many nurseries and preschools are actually doing that. I'm going to get shouted down maybe, out of necessity, if they weren't doing it before. I know that some nurseries and preschools will take training and development very seriously and always have done.
Yes.
Perhaps grown their own teams from trainees, up. But I would think it's a necessity now, just like marketing is a necessity.
Absolutely.
You don't stop.
No.
Just because your nursery happens to be full right now, because you don't know
Absolutely not.
What might happen in 2 terms' time. So we've talked a lot about collaborative leadership, really, I think, and I do think that's the best way. It's like policy writing. It's very easy to write a policy as the leader, but if people don't own it, they don't do it, in my view.
It's just a waste of paper, isn't it, in the end?
Yeah, that's right. It has to be a process. Right. Well, now let's talk a bit about stress.
Okay.
Because I feel leaders don't have anywhere to go. If you own your own nursery or preschool, you might do appraisals and supervisions for the team or your senior team if you're big enough. But who does yours? Who's the person you run to, for example?
I think there's the stress is an interesting one in that we all need some level of interest, which some people would find stressful, other people find exhilarating. And I think understanding where exhilaration is becoming stress at an individual's level is really important. I think the challenge with leaders is they often put themselves at the bottom of the priority list, and self-care is incredibly important. And I speak from somebody who was absolute rubbish at it and paid the price. I ran my school for the most part from a wheelchair. I learned to walk twice during my time as a head teacher. Once as a head teacher and once afterwards. But prioritizing self-care, making sure that you eat properly, that you rest, that you have interests and activities that fill you up, that are outside the working environment. The old saying, when you're on an aeroplane, put your own oxygen mask on first, then you can help more people, is very true. So that's the first thing. Self-care is absolutely vital. The second thing, I think, is if you are a leader and you don't have a natural opportunity to have someone work with you that you can offload, who's not going to be judgmental, who can perhaps at times say to you, tap you on the shoulder and say, I've noticed a pattern here, it's time to think about this. Then get yourself a good coach or mentor that you can offload to, that you can use as a sounding board, that you can try things out in a way that if you do it with your staff, you don't want, things, you're letting things go before you've really thought things through. And, the value of having a coach or a mentor, I think is much bigger than it may seem on the surface of it. Because ultimately, if you are in a good place, your staff and your nursery will be in a much better place than if you are stressed and you are tired and you are struggling, because they look to you. And if you're going under, they will lose confidence, and then everything starts to fall apart.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And then, of course, somebody on social media last night, very late, it's on Facebook, wrote, I don't think she could get to sleep. She said, we've got Ofsted tomorrow. Got Ofsted tomorrow. Anybody's got any tips? So I said, smile, take control with your learning walk and show off.
Yeah.
and obviously you have to be a fantastic leader if you're on the premises to do that. I also had within the last 2 weeks at a conference, I was talking to a lady who'd come to my stand. I wasn't just there to listen, although it was fab. And she had Ofsted in, and I've had that as well. I had Ofsted in, and I was in London. And she came a long way to the conference, and she didn't know whether she should turn around or not. They got outstanding. But you have to be confident with your team, don't you?
Yeah.
So it's not, being a leader is it's about putting those processes in. And we used to use the NLP circles of excellence. I hope I've got that right. So everybody, all the senior team would go into their circle of excellence. And we on the whole, we used to get outstandings as well. But that training was brought about by me. And in fact, I was actually on an NLP course in London with one of the team leaders when we got the Ofsted call, which is ironic, really. But anyway, Sarah did very well. Sarah works for me, and she got an outstanding, so all went well. But I mean, it's horrendous. As a leader, sometimes you feel out of control. I had no control what was happening back at base from London.
Actually, I'm going to challenge that. I'm going to challenge that view. And the reason I'm going to challenge that, the old saying, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. Ofsted comes in. If you are wanting to be there because you've got to put things in place because Ofsted are there, then you have to ask yourself the question, what's going on? If you as an organisation, and I think
for me, it was more about supporting the team.
That I absolutely understand. But you knew in your heart of hearts that whether you were there or not, whatever you would put in place was going to carry on. And I think that's the place to aim for, that whether you're actually on the premises or not, that you know that the standards that you have set, the policies that you've put in place, that those are so embedded that whoever comes through the door, that those will carry on. And then you're in a position to say, all you need to do is to be yourself, to really shout from the rooftops, what we've done, to be honest about the areas that we're continuing to develop. But ultimately, we're very proud of what we do because, and here is the evidence. I decided as a head teacher, the best way to protect my school was to become an Ofsted inspector.
Yeah, I did the same.
Learn from the inside. And then that if you're really prepared your staff, that actually, whether you're there or not, they're going to do themselves, the children, and you're proud.
I think for me also, I wanted to be there to support the team, but also for early years businesses, there's so much at stake. If just one person, I mean, for example, we had Ofsted in on the first day back after a holiday, and we got our outstanding stripped because she didn't feel the staff were questioning the children enough. Because of one conversation that actually happened. Well, that was her example of one conversation that actually happened. And I felt that was unfair. But, just one little thing can go wrong. And of course, we were no longer outstanding, and that good didn't make any difference to the parents using us. It didn't make us feel very good by dropping from the perch. And of course, we had that good for 4 or 5 years. It's now 4 years. It's now 6 in early years, you know. So quite a lot at stake.
There is indeed, and I'm not for one moment making light of it. But ultimately,
I do agree with you.
Ofsted is run by people. Some think they're not quite human beings, but you know, and inevitably people come with their views. The first Ofsted inspector, we got outstanding, but the first Ofsted inspector, the registered inspector, my school was in Romford, and he was so critical of what he called esturing language, and he'd got a bee in his bonnet. I think sometimes you've got to be prepared to fight.
Absolutely. That's your confidence as a leader.
And having the confidence to be able to say, actually, you're being unreasonable, and this is why, and here's my evidence to the contrary. Now, I do accept that takes confidence and experience to be able to do that, and it shouldn't be like that. But when you're dealing with human beings, you're going to get people whose perception is very different.
I can remember one inspector found a bar of soap that was covered in paint. And we had bars of soap and pump soap. It was sort of that transition period where a lot of children didn't have pump soap at home, and therefore they needed proper soap because that's what they had at home. And she brought it up to the staff room to me, and she said, "Do you think you're getting outstanding?" And so I justified it. I said, "Well, at least they've obviously washed their hands, and they've washed their hands with what they know of and at home, etc. And when the staff go in to tidy up the bathroom at snack time or after snack or what have you, they'll sort it. Please put the soap back." And we did. We still got outstanding, but they can challenge you in unusual ways.
But I think that again, that's a sign of a really good leader. As long as you know, and I think what's really important,
your purpose, your why,
but also you've got to be authentic. It's no good trying to justify something that in your heart of hearts that you know is wrong. But if you know that actually that what is going on is right, then fight it to the death.
Absolutely.
But that's the thing, is being able to make the judgment about what's reasonable and what is not. Yeah. But I think one of the things that many people, and I mean, I'm not trying to teach anybody to suck eggs, but many people will make sweeping statements without demonstrating the evidence. And I think, if I was going to give anybody any advice about Ofsted, it's an evidence-based inspection. Yeah. And so, as a nursery or a childminder, whoever you are, gather evidence. So if, for example, there's a child kicking off because it's a bad day, then be able to demonstrate that policies are being implemented, that the parents are being engaged, whatever, but take the lead. Don't be kowtowing, be respectful. But if somebody is making judgments that you believe that are unfair or unwarranted, then it's time for you to say, actually, I don't agree, and this is why I don't agree, and here is the reasons, and the evidence behind it.
And that goes back to what I was saying, and this might be a nice place to finish off, is we have to stick our necks out as leaders for the children that we look after, the children and parents and our team.
Absolutely. Integrity, courage, and compassion. Those are the 3 really intrinsic values of great leaders, I think.
It's lovely. Well, thank you, Gina. Is there anything else you wanted to say, though, before we round up?
Just to say, for what it's worth, I think that the job that you do is incredibly important. That those early years, that opportunity for those children, that you have the opportunity to make such a difference to their lives, and to say thank you and keep up the great work, because I know they often don't get the credit that you should, and I'd like to give you credit, because those kids who came into school who had been through good early years provision stood head and shoulders.
Yeah,
and I'm
absolutely.
not just talking about the academic, I'm talking about the way they were able to manage themselves, play with other children, engage. It's so valuable.
And actually, we're moving into an AI world. You know, we're actually going to need creative people.
Absolutely.
We're going to need people that think outside the box.
Definitely.
I always say the skills we learn in kindergarten are what people are interviewed for. So they might get to the interview because of their qualifications, but actually when they're sitting there having their interview, they're trying to find out if they can think outside the box, if they're a team player, if they can sort out problems, if they're motivated, etc. So thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And it's now not so hot, so it might be now's the time to go and sit with the gin and tonic outside if that's something you'd like to do. Because it's not so warm.
Watering the garden, I think.
Yes, exactly. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I've got a hoster that's looking very, 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 very ill.
Oh dear.
So that's definitely what I should be doing. Thank you so much.